Before we get started today, I just wanted to remind you guys, as always, that the Nordic Sound is entirely funded by its patrons over at patreon.com/Nordic Sound. You would actually be surprised at how much this channel costs in monthly maintenance fees and subscriptions to keep it not only running, but running well. And that is only thanks to the patron support that this channel can always be improving, reaching new listeners through those investments. If you'd like to help support the channel and help this public resource on Nordic music stay happy and healthy, head on over to the Patreon to see the different ways you can support the channel and even get a little something back. The base tier gets you access to the Nordic Sound Discord, your name mentioned in all the episode and podcast descriptions, and voting power on potential changes and improvements to the channel. Then the premium tier, or the Seekers, get access to behind-the-scenes stuff like the research that goes into the musicology videos, such as the forthcoming Viking fiddling, or Nordic drumming, or even the ones that you can watch right now on the channel, such as the one on the Drangfea ballad that we actually talk about in this interview coming up. But if Patreon is not an option, please do not underestimate how much it helps to just leave a like, comment, subscribe, or even share the video. That little bit goes a long way in helping the channel grow. So, thank you for your support, and on to Nordic Sound number 54 with the queen of ballads herself, Mia Guldhammer. And a quick note, there is some minor connectivity problems at the beginning, but they do settle down. Audio thankfully stayed intact, so all it took was some minor surgery in the video editing process, but you will notice like the Zoom matrix effect at times. It's just a part of the experience of Zoom calling across the planet. So thank you for understanding, and now on with the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nordic Sound. As always, I'm your host, Jamison Foster, ethnomusicologist at University of Colorado Boulder, and today we are joined by celebrated Danish vocalist Mia Guldhammer. Performing with bands such as Virelai, Mallebrok, so many more, and now Guldganger, Mia has made a name for herself over the years not only as an excellent singer, but also for her knowledge of medieval ballad repertoire and her experience in the Viking market scene. There is so much I am stoked to talk with Mia about today, but first, Mia, welcome to the channel. It is great to finally have you here on the Nordic Sound.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, and likewise, the honor is mine to have you here, especially considering I have so many friends who have been in this Viking market scene like since the 90s, since the early 2000s, yes. And they always mention Virelai as like the standard band of when they're thinking about, music at these Viking markets. So you're kind of a superstar.
Oh, wow. I don't feel like a superstar, but that's very nice to hear.
Yeah, we never do we?
I guess not.
Yeah, so Mia, before we get into like the thick of things with the ballads, which we are probably going to both dork out about completely here, I would love to hear about your upbringing as a musician, because I would be surprised if you got started on Danish ballads, or maybe you did, but I would really love to hear sort of where your origin story begins with music in general.
Yeah. Okay, I will try to tune into that. It's actually like the simplest of the ways into music. It's just growing up in the countryside, having parents that played and sang. So that's, and it's really like the first memory I have ever. It's like sitting at my mother's lap and, resting my head against her chest, falling asleep while she's singing, and people are singing in the room, and it's what you would call like everyday singing. So it's not like something that's taught. It's just something you do for your own amusement and entertainment. So I did that as well, and yeah, I grew up in like a little farm in the countryside, and I would especially sing to the pigeons because my father, he had like a pigeon coop, and I would go there each day when I got home from school. I was alone for a couple of hours, and then I would just sit and sing to the birds, and it was really nice. So I would have I would prepare like a set list, and in the beginning they would all, be a bit disturbed and a bit like rattled. They would fly around and whoa, and then as the concert would progress, they would like calm down, and then eventually, when the concert finished, they would sit like in each little room. They had like these little rooms with a nest, and they would sit like couple by couple, and they would be like all poofed up, and they would be kissing each other and closing their eyes. And when they did that, I was like, yes. Then I knew that the concert had like reached its peak, and I had fulfilled my mission. So, but it was really lovely. I can really recommend singing to animals. We have a lot of traditional singers in Denmark, and a lot of people have been singing while milking the cows or the goats, or yeah, calling home the animals.
Yeah, so I see we're both bird people then. I see why you have such a fondness already for my parrot.
I
Yeah,
love your
yeah,
bird.
yeah, a lot. Yeah, cricket. Sometimes I feel like cricket has a bigger fan base than I do, which I'm
I
okay
don't
with
think
because
so.
cricket earns it. But no, I know. I remember, the first thing that I would do. We got him when he was a little baby. Um, and the very first thing that we would do to make him feel comfortable at home is I would play guitar for him or something, or my wife Alyssa
Oh,
would sing for him. And I still have such a fond memory of one night at dinner. He sat on my finger right here, this little thing, while I was eating dinner, and I just started singing the ABCs to him, and he just did that exactly what you just described. He
yeah,
fluffed up, and from then on, the earliest way that I had to make him feel comfortable was to play music for him. And
yeah,
now he's totally confident and comfortable. And you see, he tries to destroy the instruments and everything like that.
yeah. He wants
But
to participate.
yeah, absolutely. And so I love to hear that this starts a lot with singing for pigeons, because I can also highly recommend singing for animals and singing for birds. It's a great
Yeah,
experience.
it really is. Music is for everyone.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
you grew up in a musical family. You mentioned that you are hearing everyday music, as a kid. And so I'm want to hear a little bit more about what other kinds of music you were hearing growing up, or sort of maybe what your first experience was playing or participating in music growing up with other humans. I love the animals, but I'd love to hear about other
Yes.
humans too.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Uh, I guess when I was around 7, my parents, they said, "Hey, now you can go to the local music school. And what do you want to play?" And I don't know why, but I sort of screamed out, "I want to play the drums." And I had no like, I don't know why I got that idea. I didn't know anyone who played the drums. But then I entered like the music school, and I had like the kindest teacher, like the best way to start, Jens Olsen, and he was such a nice, very patient with this little uh, girl from the country. Um, and it would be like, I was so tiny, so when I sat behind the drum kit, they couldn't see me when we did like spring concerts and stuff. So it was always like, "Yes, and Mia, will you stand up, please, so we can see there was a human playing." And my parents, they it's like they were just into music. Like, I think it's also got to do, with um, the 60s and the 70s folk revival, and they were very much fond of like, the campfire guitar, um, yeah, the socializing around singing political songs and stuff like that. So we had like a family band, and besides that, it was a lot of it was both like it was actually like folk music, Danish traditional music. We would, they had moved from the big city to the countryside. They wanted to be a part of the community there. So they would ask like the local postman who played, an old man who played like the accordion, and a guy they met at the commune who played the fiddle. So they sort of gathered people just for like jam sessions and stuff. And it was all kinds of music. I really liked, I would listen to my parents' records, and it would be like Peter, Paul, Mary, and Simon Garfunkel, and all this, lovely harmonizing, stuff from their youth. So it was a sort of a mixture, and we would just, there wasn't like, it wasn't put into like, it was just everything. So like, if you stuck on the toilet, you read the shampoo bottle. It's like, it was sort of that way. But the music was just, let's sing that one. So anything goes, sort of an approach to it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Just whatever anyone knew, because it seems to me, at least from the way that you're telling this story, it seems that the most important part of this was just making music together, not particularly making a specific kind of music, but it's very much the social and communal element to it that you grew up with here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also like using it for chores who were boring, like doing the dishes, or if we had to drive a long way by car or something, then we would just sing. So I would just do that as well, walking outside, playing outdoors. So I would just walk around singing whatever came into my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're already now mentioning going from drums to singing eventually. So this is kind of where singing starts to come into the mix for you, but do you have a particular moment or reason why you went from being a drummer to now sort of being known mostly as a singer? Yeah, I would love to hear more about sort of how you became a singer.
Yeah, that's actually quite funny. Because I only played the drums for like 10 years.
Only.
No,
Only
but
10.
still, yeah. And I think because I was like, I was also like a goofy country girl. So I was also quite insecure, and playing the drums, being insecure, that's not a really good mix. So because I would always be like afraid of making mistakes or ruining something for the other people who played. So I was like very minimalistic in my style, perhaps a bit boring as well. But it gave like a really nice rhythmic foundation. And then when I was, that was really a highlight for me when I was around 17 years old. I attended this, it's like a youth seminar. It was the first of its kind in Denmark. It's called Rod, very Danish, Rod. And it just means roots. And it was like, it was a seminar that was built by a lot of really good folk musicians in Denmark now, that pro people. And they were, they were annoyed that all the Spillemandsstævner and the places, festivals, you could go and play folk music, it was always old people, and the old people decided what was going to happen and what the focus should be. So there was like this little group of people from, perhaps you heard of the Danish band Phoenix, or something called Ballading. It was like these young people, Harald Haugaard, Henrik Jansberg. It was like Danish, now professional folk musicians. And they made this seminar. And the plan was that it should only be for young people. So you could attend from you were 15 until you were 25. And this is actually still happening. And it's amazing. And it's like young forever, because you have this sort of, limited age. And I attended this. And I just found myself one evening like in a circle, and people started to sing, ballads. And I knew a few ballads from my mother, but I hadn't really, thought about what this sort of song or this material was. And I had like the closest thing I've ever had to like a spiritual experience, because I was like, ugh! I felt so much at home. I felt like this was the meaning of, singing and music. So they just, totally flushed into me somehow. Something awoke. There's a very nice ballad singer in Denmark. She says it's like the fire of the ballads fire. And I can say for sure I fell into the fire that night. And I often, later on, I thought, was it because, I drank a lot of coffee punch? Or what was it? Because it was so strong. It was like a calling. And that evening, it was like every time a new ballad is sung, I was like, I know this one, and I know this one. It was really strange. And I think it's of course it's because the language and the stories they're so similar to folk tales and fairy tales that most children grow up with. So there was just something very familiar in this particular song repertoire. So from that on, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to discover more, and then it became like a crazy hyper focus and like a mission in my life. So I just tried to attend whatever ballad seminar or went to the library. I just really dug into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like especially because so many musicians, have those moments of, you hear that specific kind of music, and a lot of us when we start as musicians, especially when we're younger, we just do it because it's what we know how to do. At least that's what I've noticed, with talking to so many musicians. And then there's just always this moment where you hear that particular kind of music that focuses it from just I play music because it's what I know how to do to I play this because I need to play this, and it becomes very important to you. And so this is what ballads are for you, essentially.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And I've just been very thankful that I still feel that way after all these years, because sometimes, from a distance, I look at it and it's like, it's really odd because this is like strange material somehow, and there's very few people who are dedicated to this and find it interesting. So I'm just really happy to still like feel the spark and excitement towards ballads.
Yeah, so for anyone listening who maybe doesn't know exactly what Danish ballads are or what these medieval ballads are, how would you sort of, if someone were to ask you what is a ballad, what is a medieval ballad, what is a Danish ballad, what would be your sort of pitch to explain what they are?
Yeah, I would say like a ballad is a story that you sing. Or a ballad is a fairy tale that you sing. And it's like with this you call it an oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
It's like with the fairy tales. I know there's still a lot of people doing this, but it's sort of got stuck in like fixed forms. Whereas the ballads, they've really been moving, because it's like, it's been passed on so many times for so many years. The first, sources we have in Denmark, it's around 1200. You can trace it back to this time, and then it's just gone, passed on. So it's had more like a flexible way of changing along with the times, and the different, words would fall in and out, and whoever sung these ballads would themselves into them and make whatever they thought was relevant appear in the stories. So it's a strange mixture of history and also personal, yeah, hand-me-downs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I love that you see a connection between ballads and fairy tales, really, because the especially these fairy tales, they get written down in a very specific way in the 1800s, and that's kind of
Yeah.
just how they've stayed, just because someone wrote them down, put their
Yeah.
name on it, Asbjørnsen and Moe, many others as well. The Grimms, they write them, and then so they take on this very fixed form. And you're right that ballads are much more alive by comparison. I mean, take Hermanelig as just one example of a ballad that how many different bands, singers, artists have sang that one song that tells this really awesome story that has so many different beginnings and endings and middles. And so it is very much more alive. The which character comes out on top? Is this a story for trolls, or is this the story for the Christians, right? And that's the way that these artists sort of pick whatever version of the story they want to tell, and from there it turns into this entirely different living story compared to if we were just to read the story of Askeladden for the 500th time and nothing changes. I love that perspective that these ballads are very much like a living fairy tale.
Yeah. And I think the same intention was probably, yeah, put in fairy tales or spoken
Hmm.
or tradition. But I think it's really important. Of course, there's people, it's been so many times that I've sung a special particular ballad, and people would go to me and say, "Is it really like that?" Or I don't think, my grandmother, she would sing it like this, and it's like, yeah, because, and I think we owe it to keep it alive, and we owe it to put it into our own stories and add ourselves into it, if you can say that.
Hmm.
So that's what keeps it alive, not to have it fixed.
Hmm.
And of course, it helps to like adapt it very much and have a wide range of like basic stuff. So if you know one ballad, you can quickly add on more. But
Hmm.
it's also important to keep it fluent in order for it to survive and in order for it to be relevant today as well. So that's
I know specifically the kind the if you go to any of these pagan music festivals like Midgårdsblot or something, you actually will
yeah.
find a crazy amount of Hermanelig t-shirts that just like on the back of the t-shirt it'll say fuck Hermanelig, and it's just so this story, the reason I love using this one is because this story has become like very popular with like modern pagans or heathens as like a story of, if you tell the version of the story where the troll woman comes out on top, like that becomes like this rallying song, or like this point of pride for these modern pagans, which are very much a lot like the hippies you were talking about quite a bit ago. And that's just a great example of how, like, even though the story is really old, its meaning can change based on the people who are telling it and the meaning that we want to get out of it. And in that case, it's fuck Hermanelig. Yeah.
That's funny. I've never seen that sort of T-shirt.
I
Perhaps I
only
should.
see them at metal festivals. I only
Yeah,
see them. So I actually kind of want to know where they got them from, because
yeah, yeah,
it's
me
one of the
too.
most common ones, and I've never actually bothered looking up where they get it from. I always
No,
assumed it was a Garmina shirt, but I thought that was a little crass for Garmina.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so
No,
so if the place that I'm primarily, seeing people interact with these ballads today are actually oddly enough at these heavy metal festivals and stuff like that. I'm curious what sort of, you mentioned that you would go to these camps for youth folk music, which I find fascinating, and I can tell that that's had quite an effect on Danish folk music, especially compared to Norwegian and Swedish. I mean, Danish folk music has a youth to it that I really can't explain. Like of all these younger of all these younger artists, I'm thinking
Yeah,
of you know, if last maybe a decade ago there was this band called Münsterland. I don't know what happened to them,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah, that's not- yeah.
yeah, now there's even Stundom, and there's just all of these, of course, Streamer Circus, and I just find Floating Sofa Quartet. I could go on and on about all of these folk bands that have this very youthful, modern approach to folk music. So maybe for a second we could just talk a little bit, if you want to have anything you can say about the effect this
Yes.
focus on youth folk music has had even all these years later on what Danish folk music sounds like.
Yes, I think especially this seminar, it has had such a huge impact. Um, and it's usually like, there's a seminar, there's like 100 to 200 people. They hire in uh, teachers from, now it's from all over the world. In the beginning, it was very like only Danish instructors, but it has changed. And then it's always like there's what do you call, there's like a work group that's chosen every year, like by voting. Um, and in this work group each year, there will be like a member from the, the the work group before. So it's all sort of like the same with tradition, like it's handed on, and they just sort of sharpened this way of organizing, like in a totally amazing way. It's like so well organized. It's really amazing. And from this, all sort of other organizations, or of course, like the basic is friendships got like built up, and bands started there, and so on. Floating Sofa Quartet, for instance, and some years, then there's some young Swedish folk musicians. They noticed, hey, they have this folk camp. Let's go there, and so from now it's like people from France and Belgium. And, we had like 5 Americans this year, some really cool fiddlers. Yeah, so it's like it's spread also because I think um, perhaps it's also got to do with many countries would never let young people do this by themselves. They would have like, also because, yeah, I guess sometimes there's been a bit of a crazy alcohol culture, but uh, yeah, they got that under control as well now. Um, uh, but I think from this, it's like a grassroots organization, and then comes Nordic dance, like a new revival of the folk dancing scene, and it's just a lot of young people who are, studying all kinds of stuff. Some go to become professional folk musicians, and some are just like very happy amateurs. Um, some are into the folk dancing, so it's like it spreads out, and it's sprouts from there. And I think it has a lot to do with this very strong young folk scene, where they're also very aware of the fact that we collaborate with our neighbor countries, and yeah, or much into Irish tunes or whatever. So there's like room and space for everything. There was a couple of years where there was a lot of like klezmer influence. So it's like tides and waves, and but yeah, but it's just really like the foundation of this environment. People meet, get married, and children, and yeah. So also things develop from this. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so I would actually love to hear your perspective on a recurring theme that comes up on this podcast when I talk to traditional folk musicians, particularly from Norway or Sweden, is this idea that Denmark, and please feel free to even just say that this claim itself is wrong, right? But the idea is that Denmark has always been a little sleepy when it comes to traditional folk music. Like, of course, Norway is just the loud one with like fiddles, Hardanger fiddles, or death.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Sweden in the 90s
Yeah.
really blows
Yeah.
up. Um, even Finland has a revival with Konstajula in the 60s or 70s. Denmark, comparatively, from my perspective, seems a little sleepy. Do you think
Yeah,
that
that's true.
this? Okay, so if we're going to
No, I don't
agree,
know.
oh
If,
yeah, so please,
if,
if I would
yeah,
love to hear
yeah,
at least maybe your thoughts on just that initial statement that Danish
yeah,
folk music is a little sleepy.
yeah. Um, I think it's got to do with, compared to the other Nordic countries, since Denmark is it's very small. You can get from one side to another in few hours in a day. Um, and it's sort of, it's just like influences will go on very quickly through the country. Um, there's it's been like both when it comes in terms of dialect and also the dialects and the folk music and so on. It's like there's this wonderful accordion player, Mette Katrine. She says like Denmark, in the whole of Denmark is my village, and I think that's sort of where other Nordic countries would be, people would be more isolated. You could focus more on special tunes or this sort of polska or specifics, and be a bit closed around this, so it could really like a very nice stew. It could really get an essence that was strong. And in Denmark, it's like, and we would be really influenced by whatever passed along. Um, there are still a few places, Fanø, some of the islands, and some areas that are more rural or are more isolated, where you can hear the dialect or you can hear, the tradition stronger. But I think it's a combination of that, and then this is just my opinion, that few Danish people are proud of their folk music, and I think both in Sweden and in Norway and in Finland, also perhaps especially in Norway, and I don't. If you've been a bit oppressed, then you want to like leech onto what you got. This is identity. So, and sorry about that, Norway, because but I think it's also got to do with it that Denmark is like, yeah, what's outside this little area with more, yeah, we haven't really like found this proudness in our music in the same way as
Yeah.
some of these other countries have.
Yeah, interesting that because I would agree. I'm always hesitant to offer my opinion since I'm not Scandinavian, right? But what I will say is that at least what I have observed is that that pride element does come from, especially if you look at the Norwegian, situation. Pride stems from a feeling of adversity, right? When you feel adversity, you then feel a need to be more proud. Denmark, like, just seems like you guys have been more content. Like, you have less of a reason to so fervently,
Yeah,
latch on to, cultural identity when you feel already comfortable and confident about it.
yeah.
And it's interesting to hear that, despite the fact that I am not Danish, it seems like that observation doesn't seem to be too far from
No,
the
I think
truth.
you're
Yeah.
absolutely onto something.
All
Yeah.
right. Cool. Good to know.
But it's a lot of, it's a lot of things having to do with this. It's also, um, yeah, the pride. I think it stems from the pride, and then, for instance, in Denmark, it's been, we don't have traditional music or dancing. It's not appearing in like radio or TV as it is in Germany and Sweden and Norway. Um, and actually, it's been sort of it's been an attempt to like get it out. Uh, Perhaps that's got to do with the 70s and the big folk revival there, because it was like everybody can join this, wee, and it would sound sometimes, more or less. I don't know, but that could scare away some people who had like perhaps a classical approach. Or, So the fact that it's been weeded out of like these general ways of getting introduced to music in your folk culture, I guess that's an issue as well. I have like an education in pedagogic. What's that in English?
Yeah, pedagogy. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I had to do like my bachelor, I wanted to discover why isn't there any like folk music and dance and like song games and stuff like that? Why isn't it in the kindergartens and in school and stuff? It was very few places this was present. And actually, what I found out was that these what do you call this? It's sort of it's a special sort of a wave in pedagogic, where they had, they went like, no, the true meaning of music, and it has to be this rhythmic stuff. It has to be like Afro-American, Afro-Cuban stuff, and and I found like sentences from interviews where they were like, yeah, you'll have people from the rural areas. They will come for this education. They will want to sing their old songs, and don't let them. It's like it's ruining the kids. It's like militant. It's like little children walking like soldiers and stuff. So they wanted to get rid of it, and they managed.
Interesting.
Very well. Yeah. So it's like it's a lot of things, and I think it all has its origin in the fact that the proud feeling of this is how it sounds where we come from. This is us. This is our story. It wasn't really that present, except for in the safe environment, in the folk music environment.
Yeah, no, I find that fascinating because, part of my work, my actual like job that I do for it, outside of my studies, is to translate old journals that were published about teaching music in Scandinavia. So I actually read quite a bit of journals, Nordisk Musikktidsskrift, Dansk Musikkultur, all of these different papers, magazines, journals, whatever you want to call them. And something that you are only just now making me realize is that when I read the Swedish or the Norwegian ones that are primarily focused around teaching music to children, they are almost always talking about the importance of incorporating folk song or this sort of thing into teaching. And you are right that in the Danish side of things, I don't see that kind of conversation around, and this is even in the early 20th century that these conversations are happening. And I don't remember seeing much from Danish music pedagogy journals saying, no, you should teach them folk music. It's almost entirely left out of the conversation. So that's a very interesting point there, that even it seems like systematically it's kind of pushed out for a variety of reasons.
I would claim that it's been, totally systematic. And then out of that came something else good, but I think it was a misunderstanding too. Because the children are like the most serious when it comes to handing down tradition, folk music, and the way they play, and like the rhythmical songs and stuff, all the padding, what do you call it? Sorry. But I think it's like, it's been, that they didn't have to do that. They could like look at it as if this too could be, it's perhaps it also comes from this sort of, I think it's a misguided approach to tradition to think that it's like locked, or it's like, it goes from here to here and you have to do it exactly like this. Because as we talked about earlier, it's always moving. It's always, developing and taking a shape. So, and I think if they had that knowledge or that approach, then it would probably still be more present in today's teachings in schools.
Yeah, so if I'm sort of seeing things connect here because I will also say that when I think of Norwegian folk music, I think of one thing, or not one thing. You know what I mean? When I think of Swedish music, I think of this thing. When I think of Danish folk music, and you can tell me if this is crazy or not, I actually primarily think, and you're going to see where I'm going with this, I primarily think of these medieval markets. I primarily think
Oh,
of these Viking reenactments and all of this because
okay.
for me, at least as an outsider looking in, right, from my perspective, it does seem like these markets are where bands like Virelai or like all of these other bands that are playing these old ballads but reshaped into something new, as is the conversation that we're having now. I very much see these markets and these reenactments that you also participate in as this uniquely Danish. I know the other Scandinavian countries have these reenactments, but to me in Denmark, that's where I see the music, so what I could loosely call like a folk music tradition, really being handled with the most engagement, or at the very least, I see it as a really lively community or setting in which you can observe a particular kind of folk music happening today. Um, was is that something that maybe you have observed since you've been in this scene for quite a while? I'm just sort of curious where maybe the folk music and the ballads might be intersecting at these Viking markets or medieval markets or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's really interesting to have like you looking at it from the outside, because for me it's like there is a Danish folk music environment,
Hmm.
and it's been strong since the folk revival, uh, um, and it has had like different places, uh, cities, where people would be like um, arranging festivals or stævner, um, like workshops and stuff. And the Danish folk music community is like, it's small, but to me it feels very strong, and it's a very nice and inclusive environment. I think that goes for folk music environments all over the world. Um, but it's like a place of its own, um, and I think it's actually harder than I perhaps know of to find it, to to recognize where things are happening or what is going on. Uh, Whereas the Viking markets and the medieval scene, it's younger than this. The history of these markets, but what they have in common, these two, is like it's it's all ages. So it's like all the full circle of all sorts of people. It's very inclusive, and there's room for people whoever they are. Um, like the local, what do you call that, local village.
Yeah.
And you have families, and you have, so that's where they're very similar. Um, yeah, you should really come to Denmark and experience some of these
I'm going
folk
to.
music
I'm
festivals.
very much planning on going to Riba next year for that
Yeah,
one. So yeah, so
yeah,
trust me, I'm going to be experiencing these firsthand. And I'm very much looking forward to it. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
But you
So
should really try both, because it's like it's two different environments,
mhm.
and I would say so they have a lot of similarities. And since I came from like the young folk music community, when I was invited into Virelai, I was like, oh my God, we're gonna wear that silly clothes. Because I've never, I had never been to like a historical market, and I was just into ballads. I wasn't like into like the historical medieval side of it. Um, and then I just realized, oh, this is just, and the byproduct of, if I would announce a ballad concert somewhere, the people who would show up would be people who already knew they were interested in this particular folk music, and the crowd would perhaps be small. But if I was at a medieval or Viking market with Virelai, people would go there for just, hey, it's weekend and we're going with the entire family. They would bring, grandmother and dog and kids and cousins, and then they would be like, well, we paid to get in here. We don't want to miss anything, and we should get value for our money. So we will also sit down here, listen to the music, and sing along on this ballad. And then all of a sudden, throughout the years, I was like, oh my God, this is like amazing. Because all these people, they would never attend a folk music event. They would say, no, that's not, what's that? It's like wooden clocks and untuned fiddles, and no, thank you. So they would be there, and they would just be very open and receptive, and they would totally sing along. And for me, being so in love with this material and the ballads, I would like, oh, these people are walking home, and they might just have like a little chorus line from a ballad in their pocket when they walk home. It's like they don't even know it's their precious folk culture, but they just happily sang along and joined like this very old traditional stuff without considering whether they liked it or not. And I just thought that was really wonderful to realize that this really reaches a lot of people who would never go search for it on their own. And who might not be aware, hey, we have a history, we have music and stories and dances and tunes, and it's very much alive. Mm-hmm. So it's been a very nice scene to like share this stuff with so many nice people.
Yeah. So when was this first market that you went to? About what year?
I entered Virelai in 2009, I think. Okay. And it was before that I had just, had like 2 cues. I was like, I want to have children and I want to sing ballads. It was like my main goals in life. So I have 3 children, all grown up, moving away. And so I still have the ballads. That's nice. And so yeah. But for the first concert, the first Virelai concert, it was like crazy. It was like in France, they have this instrument building festival, Jean-Jean, I think it was called back then. And that was my first concert. It was crazy. I was like still breastfeeding my youngest, and like had him, in France along with me, and I was really like, help. But it went very well. And then the first market I really recall with Virelai, it must be this very huge market called Horsens Medieval Market. It's like very, very big European medieval market. Mm-hmm. It has like 6 stages, and there's like it's like the Roskilde Festival of medieval markets. So it's really, really huge, and it's free, and oh my God, it's hectic and wonderful. Thousands of shops and so many participants and people. Mm-hmm. So I remember that as being really wonderful and a bit overwhelming, and also like you have to run from scene to scene, so you have like a little short break, and then you have to go to the forest stage, and and I would often stand at the wrong stage, like, oh, those fools, I've been waiting for, oh my God, I'm not at the right. So it's very hectic, and it's very wonderful, and you meet colleagues from both Italy and Germany and Sweden and Norway, and Denmark, of course. So yeah, I would highly recommend anyone going experiencing that. It's a great market. But I also think what I remember from that was also like, oh my God, I have to sing like without a microphone, without, there's no, I just have to stand on this little wooden stage, and sometimes there would be a crowd of few people, and sometimes it would be 200. And that was really like, because I have no training in, I'm not a trained vocalist, so I was just been learning by doing, sort of like the only thing I have is like, does it hurt? Yes, no. So so that was a bit of a awakening, like, shit, how do I do this? How do I sing in a way that can be understood and heard, and reach as far out as possible? And it took a couple of years where each Sunday, because Virelai would travel for half a year at a time, like from May to October, we would go like each week, each weekend. And these markets, it's often like 3 or 4 concerts a day. So each Sunday I would be like, I feel a bit tired. And then eventually I sort of learned tricks. It was like, sort of visualization stuff to make it. And I know this sort of tent is not really easy to sing in. It'll dampen the sound. So if I do this, or if I stand here, or stuff like that. If there would come like rain, if the rain would pour down, we would invite people to the stage that had like a little roof, and yeah, so just how to work with this material to, and technical side of it. I don't know if that was sort of what you were asking. I just
it was no, for sure, because I love to hear sort of how it's funny that you're actually invited to Virelai first before you had even like been to one of these, and then all of a sudden you sort of just get thrown into the deep end. There's just so many different things I could ask you about this, but I think the more specifically following up on this idea that when you were much younger, you're introduced to ballads, and you're experiencing them in this very communal setting, and then all these years later, you get invited to sing for this band that's doing ballads, and you go to these markets that all of a sudden, this isn't like of course, in the grand scheme of Danish culture, it's still a very niche thing, but no longer are ballads this weird thing you're into, where instead, like, ballads are, these markets are this venue, this place where these ballads are very much at home and wanted to be there. Like, how did that feel to sort of travel that arc from being in, having this nerdy obsession over ballads, to finally being thrown into these communities where it's like, no, we want ballads, especially considering the other perspective you added, where this is very accessible for people, more so in many ways than the actual folk music scenes. So that just sounds like a dream come true, or like the stars aligning of all of this. I would love to hear more about how these markets made people more accessible for ballads and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but that's really, a good point. And also because, and it's really nice, because before, when I was young, when I had went to when I fell into the fire, I would go to like, there was a part of the Danish folkloristic, what do you call that? It's like a part of Dansk Folkemindesamling.
Like a
they
folk
had
association, yeah.
Yeah, so they would have like a place called Hoager, which is sort of has an interesting repetition, in the Danish folk music scene. But I would go there, go to the sources and go to the ballad seminars. So it was really like small, safe environment. And just before I got invited into Virelai, I had like, I was like, okay, I have these children. I had 3 little kids, and and I had a husband that worked a lot, and I was just like, I just wanna sing ballads. And I remember calling like an older ballad singer, a guy, and I was like, "How do I do this? I just want to sing ballads." And he was like, "Oh, that's not possible, little friend. It's not like a job. You can't really." It's like, okay. So I felt depressed and I felt like stuck. I loved, having the children and and so on, but it was like I don't know what way to take. So I was actually quite low uh, at that moment. And then it was like an evening, and I know it's a bit exaggerated, but I lived like in an old mill, and they had like this little pond outside, and my husband was away at work, my ex-husband was away at work, and I was, had tucked in the children, and I was really like low thinking, sort of, if I go drown myself in the pond, will he be home before they wake up? Because otherwise, I was really down.
Yeah.
And then just that evening, sitting there, the phone rang, and it was Martin Seeberg, who I knew from the folk music environment. And he was like, "Hey, I'm in this medieval band, and our singer is quitting, and you know all these ballads. Do you want to be a part of it?" And it was like, "What?" Yeah, and then getting through the, do I have to wear that clothes and stuff like that. But then I just quickly realized that this was like a dream come true, because all of a sudden I could make a living from singing ballads. That was just amazing. Uh, and yeah, and also like coming from a perspective of, this is a tradition. We are very few people keeping it alive. And there's been done a lot of work by many good people to revitalize and keep the ballad tradition alive in Denmark. But it was also like a very closed environment, and there were good things and there were bad things about this. So all of a sudden, it was just, I was able to let it free, and totally learning by doing. So I got this material, and it's probably been sung before in some sort of setting similar to this, hundreds of years ago, I don't know. But now it's my chance to use it and find out what works, what doesn't work, which stories are, nice for people to hear, what will make them listen, how to make them listen, how to do, the phrases, how long can we make these ballads, and so on. So it was an amazing place to get into this material in a way that I couldn't have done in any other way, with so many people who had no clue what this was, sending back their impression of what was happening. So that was really amazing. Yeah. For 16 years, we're really getting a sense of where do they work, how do they work, and so on.
Yeah, that is just so cool to me that it seemed like it was just you were right at home with, like, even though you didn't know from the dorky costumes that it would be this for you, it just sort of came. As I said, the stars just aligned, and you have this wonderful opportunity to perform and sing these ballads in a place that's meant for them. And considering that 2009, it seems, would be the year that you were getting into this. What do you think about sort of the explosive popularity of these markets over the years, especially because you're kind of from the before times of, like, that we talk about, like, before Vardruna, before Heilung, before all of these bands that take this medieval aesthetic and completely go somewhere new with it. A lot of people don't realize that these venues, like these markets, have been around for decades, and there was a specific kind of music being made here, like the music of Virelai. I would just love to hear your perspective as someone who is often cited as, like, an icon of these medieval market singing events. Like, you are the ballad singer in Denmark, is how I hear people refer to you as. Yep. I would love to hear your perspective on how these things, the popularity of ballads and of these markets and these medieval things, have exploded over the last 10 years or so, internationally especially. Like you get Americans that are like really into it, which is seems like it would have been unheard of even just in the 90s.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I get the question totally. So it's like, you mean like the development of it, like from then till now, or?
Yeah, exactly. So just especially just like the ways that the Viking market thing used to be this thing you took the family to on the weekends and it was you paid your money, you got to experience the ballads, to now this thing that around the world people are like really interested in, and it seems to just have taken on like an international popularity of it. And I just don't know if that has changed anything like for you at the markets, or just anything you might have to say on the fact that just these markets and the music surrounding them have really exploded in popularity, at least in media and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think it of course it has to do with like TV shows,
Yep.
movies, and stuff. But um, I also sometimes it seems like this sort of events, they can be like a substitute if you're perhaps not really connected to your traditions or traditional music, or um, then this seems like a way to, yeah, because to me it's like I hadn't had my tradition. I didn't have the knowledge of my songs and dances and tunes. That would really have been sort of a poor place. It has given me so much. It has given me so much, both in terms of identity and safety and a sense of belonging somewhere, and having roots, and you know that just singing a ballad is like, oh, someone had this feeling before me. So not being alone. And I think they can become sort of a substitute if you don't have a clear connection to your tradition, wherever you come from. Um, that's one thing. And then there's sort of the, oh my God, I'm alive. There's knights and there's horses and there's sheep and there's um, merchants and there's all sort of, it's like you walk a movie scene somehow. Sometimes it's like connecting with history. And of course, often a very modern interpretation of history. And there's so much where we don't know this. We don't know. We just
Mm-hmm.
give like a sort of a flavor of this could have happened. Yeah. So I think it's because we just basically, as human beings, need roots, and we need this sort of connection. And we also need like places where we can go, where it's not like selected different age groups, that it's like a very tribe sort of sense when you're at these places. I think it's also got to do with the fact that you don't have your electronic devices. You have like, it's very, people who sit at these markets, they do amazing handcrafts, and craftsmanship is just, whoa, you can make stuff. People make the most beautiful things with tools that they have made themselves as well, all the way down. So the pace is it's just, yeah. And I know a lot of people also in these markets, and we all have this, when you put on your dress or your warm clothes, it's like shoulders, you just unwind. And there's, the all the senses are sort of put into to play, so you can smell like the bonfire, and you can taste stuff, and people will sit around in their little camps, and the sensory experience of it all. You're outdoor, the weather, you can feel the weather, however it is. The fabrics, everything is just very natural. And I think perhaps we just miss that sometimes more than we know. So I think that's why it's still going on, and why it works and makes many people happy. And you can have a special interest in history, and then go see stuff or hear a lecture at some markets and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things for everyone, no matter what your interest is, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful because I know that at least from what I get from going to these events and then also studying them from like a from an ethnomusicological point of view, where a very long complicated word for just saying why people make music, why people participate in music and that sort of thing. And whenever people are writing about medieval music making today of any kind, it's it's almost always implying that there's a feeling that something is missing today, and because something is missing today, we go find it somewhere else. And we can't look into the future, so people will go to the past to find what they think is missing, right? And so these medieval markets, this Viking stuff is always, there's not going to be one single thing that's missing that everyone is looking for, right? And as you said, people will go to these events or go into history to find whatever is missing to them, be it a campfire, like you said, or maybe it's the crafts, or it's the music, or the stories. And I think what you said is very beautifully puts that feeling that it doesn't even have to be this really lofty philosophical idea. It could just be something as simple as people want to go maybe weave something or go carve something, and then they just want to go sit around a fire and listen to ballads. And so in that way, these markets and this music that you make really ends up being, I don't know if I would say escape, but I would definitely say a remedy, a kind of medicine to people who feel like something is missing, and because the thing is missing, they feel the need to go look for it. And a lot of people find what they're looking for in the medieval period and these markets, and that's been a thing that's been common since the Romantics. Like the Romantics in the 1800s were some of the first people to do this medievalism type thing. And where I'm going with this is, I think the last thing I want to ask you regarding these markets in general, to bring this full circle, because you started talking about hippies, you started talking about the folk revival in the 60s and 70s and all of this. And to me, I mentioned this before, I see so many similarities between the folk revival. You mentioned Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Simon and Garfunkel, and all of these musicians, right? And if you think about what they wanted the same thing. They want to make music that is acoustic. It evokes an older time, supposedly free of modern excess, and but it resonates with a lot of people. And then it spawns this culture of campfire songs that you were mentioning, and that is still very much a part of American music experience too. Is every campfire is going to have a guy with a guitar, right? And I have this crazy idea that these markets are just another reincarnation of that folk revival. Of these are just new hippies. These people dressing up and dressing like Vikings and going to go hear ballads around a campfire while they whittle or while they learn something, like some kind of craft, is just, it's just the 60s again to me. And at the risk of talking any more than I need to, I would love to hear if maybe since you've experienced both in your childhood and now you're in these medieval markets, do you see a similarity, or at least some sort of maybe a shared heritage between these reenactments in these markets with those earlier folk revival movements with Peter, Paul, and Mary and all of them? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that a lot of the songs, from that era, it was also like with the roots in folk songs, older folk songs, apart from newly written music. So of course there's a similarity there, but it's like as if I think in Denmark, what I see is I think it's a historical, like romanticized as
Mhm.
you said. It's more that which makes people go there. The music is just a tiny fragment of all this, amongst all the other things you can, the battles and swords and crafts and so on, and food. And so I think it would definitely be more available, and it would be more like, what would you say, there's no sort of a judgment if you go to one of these places. It's not like you belong to a certain type of movement.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's more available for everyone. And if you're have a historical interest, then of course you can go to specific markets that have a high level of historical accuracy or focus. And you can go to stuff where it's more, moped
Fantasy.
style. Just want to drink some meat and,
Yeah.
and party, So it's sort of it embraces all sorts of people.
Mm-hmm.
And as well in the it's little groups that come to the markets with their little camps, and you have everything from this camp consists of doctors, engineers, people who are like, hey, I just think it's so great, I can go here and I can see battle wounds in real life, and so people together. And then you have camps where it's just party, 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 and they some of them will put a lot of honor in doing everything very historically correct, and have very fancy clothing, and others will be a bit more plastic camp, sort of. They're there for the party. So it's this mixture also, it really embraces everyone. And I don't think the hippies did that in the same way. So I think it has a general approach where you don't have to belong to a certain point of view or ideology, anything like that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Your answer has inspired just a simple question. What do the folk musicians think of these markets? Is there much interaction between the two, or because I have this image in my head that you go and you dress up and you sing these ballads and all of this. Do you then are the folk musicians watching on the other side of the fence what is she doing? I'm always so interested in the ways that that folk musicians in Denmark are interacting, if at all, with these very accessible events.
Yeah, it has changed, because like I said, when I was invited, I was like, because it was I had just, been in this youth environment, and it was like you said, hey, if you can't be a good folk musician, you can always be a medieval musician. It's it was really looked down upon. It wasn't really cool. Mm-hmm. And I also remember, coming from this ballad environment where I really felt nerdy about the chain dancing and with the correct steps. And in the beginning, when I went to Marcus, I was like, relax! Oh, I got so annoyed when reenactors came and their legs would swing, and I was like, this is not how we do this. Yeah. But I think it has changed from I think it's also because the people who sort of were a part of the Danish folk music revival, they were opponents to, the folkedragter, the costumes. And they just wanted it to be available for everybody, and they don't dress up. and it's more like newer generations. You have sometimes you have to have a distance to the old days to like appreciate. Oh, yeah. So I think it has changed from being like till more like, oh, I see you're working a lot and making money over there. That's nice. So yeah, and also I think a lot of the like pure folk music colleagues I have, I feel they totally recognize this scene now, and it's not like a laughing matter or anything silly. For them, it's like the respect also comes from, hey, you're actually able to make a living from playing folk music, because that's not really easy in such a small scene in a very small country. But yeah, sometimes it's funny. It's like this band called Pöbel.
No, haven't heard of them.
Really, totally recommend. It's like
Okay.
people from Mads Køller, from Floating Sofa Quartet.
Okay.
It's like some of Pöbel. They're the best
Okay.
Danish band ever. The musicians, they're just like crazy amazing. Everybody's been to all. Everybody's just like, oh my god. And it's both like Swedish folk musicians and Danish folk musicians. But there's one in particular. Really, really skilled instrument builder, musician, and he was really like in the beginnings, and I'm not gonna wear that stupid clothes. So whenever I meet him, like in full wool, I'm like, didn't we used to say you're not gonna? It's like, oh, but this is shit. Look at my beautiful house. Yeah. So it has changed from being a bit ridiculous to being, yeah.
That's great.
Accepted.
So do you see potential that maybe hasn't been fully realized for interaction or collaboration between folk musicians and these medieval markets? Because I mean, like, you're just a great example of there being potential for that kind of collaboration. And I was wondering if you think that there is still more that can be done, or if you would you like to see more traditional folk musicians maybe interact with this space more to maybe see other potentials that can happen between folk music and these communities?
I think it's already happening, and it's
Cool.
been happening for a long time. Yeah, as the case with the people
Hmm.
who are just like totally pro folk musicians, and then they also have like a medieval band that just kicks ass. That's just whoa. Um, so and there are people who then they might not go. They may not have like a a gig at a medieval or Viking market. Perhaps it'll be more like a 1800, 1900. So the clothing will be more like certainly not modern, but it'll be more closer to the spillemandstradition.
Hmm.
Um, but it does happen, and yeah, it just makes me so very happy. Also, there's new folk musicians who also started who are making medieval bands, and I guess also because there's so many markets. So if you want to make a living as a folk musician, this is a very nice way of doing it, because there's few folk music venues. And if you don't want to tour like abroad all the time, then this is it's a great place. And as mentioned before, it has so many similarities with the folk music environment.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much that I've learned from this conversation that I wasn't thinking about it in the ways that you've sort of told them to me throughout this whole conversation, and that's anything from just the fact that these markets are giving this accessible way for people to interact with traditional music. Um, especially after you sort of telling us about how historically traditional music has been pushed out. It seems like these reenactment spaces, these Viking markets, have been your little way of sneaking it back in to this really accessible venue where you say families, they'll even bring their dogs and they'll have a great time. And it seems like guerrilla warfare. You're like, okay, well, you'll push them out of school. Well, I'm going to bring them into the Viking markets where everyone's drinking a lot and having a good time. And you've just opened my eyes to this interaction between these Viking markets and the Danish folk scene that is explaining a lot of the thoughts that I brought up earlier about, the one I said earlier as an American looking inward, that I see these markets as really the place where folk music seems to be happening the most. And even if that wasn't entirely, correct from your point of view, it seems that they are at least becoming a really accessible way for people to interact with folk music, but then also on the musician side, they're a really accessible way for folk musicians to make money, which is always a very important issue as a folk musician. As much fun as we have doing it, as much as we love doing it, that doesn't necessarily mean we can make a living doing it. So this is, do you have any maybe final thoughts you want to say on that relationship between markets and folk music? I mean, it's not like we're going to see a Danish string quartet concert at a Viking market anytime soon. As much as I could you imagine them in the, but anything that yeah, right. It would, well, okay, so now mark my words. If that ever happens, that was my idea. But I would love
like, yeah. But I think it's important to mention that the repertoire is different.
Mm-hmm.
So the medieval bands most of them will have researched like medieval music. That's actually, when it comes to Virelai, we had very few like correct medieval. We were more like just a party band in wool. So and then we had the ballads. So we had tunes that were from the Middle Ages, but we have never really claimed to be like a historical correct band. Mm-hmm. Whereas others have a much higher level of authenticity. So that's also, it's just to say, the tunes that you would play at one of these events would not be the same as you would play in a jam session at a folk festival or something like that. So there is,
yeah, that's an important caveat, because that would open up a whole can of worms, a whole different conversation about historical authenticity of these ballads. I mean, I have this. This was a dissertation written about Scandinavian ballads. That when I read it, it starts off by saying, the most frustrating part of studying Scandinavian medieval ballads is the fact that most of them come from the Renaissance. So, like, there's the idea that actually, but then what's frustrating is, just to put it plainly, the Renaissance is not as sexy as the Middle Ages. So we call them medieval ballads and all this because of the fact that the medieval period makes our imaginations so much more vivid and fun than the Renaissance. And that's how this guy opens this dissertation, is like, look, let's just say it how it is. Most of these are not medieval, but we call them medieval because it's more fun. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, that like, you and I, we can talk about these medieval ballads knowing, these ins and outs subconsciously. But for people listening, that is an important caveat, that a lot of these ballads come from like the 1600s, or maybe just after the Middle Ages in the 1500s. But yeah, do you have anything else you want to say about historical authenticity? Because that's a whole conversation.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I think that's where I've really appreciated the freedom of being like, I'm a ballad singer, and this is a tradition ever moving. It has never, so for some projects and also for Virelai, we would look to what is the earliest source of this. But much of what would work would also be much newer things. But for me, it's like, yes, there are things I can trace back, and I can trace them way back. And I know, we have like these visebøger, like in Denmark, it's like around 40, these very old songbooks. So I know, okay, if I have to find something that's really like historical correct, then I will look, back in the material, because, as you say, there's a lot of it that's much younger.
Yeah, because a lot of musicians in this Viking music scene get themselves in a lot of needless trouble trying to say this is real Viking music.
Yeah,
And you just see that even the biggest, like I use him as an example in every podcast interview, but Einar Selvik saves himself so much trouble not claiming to be playing Viking music, because this
yeah,
same exact idea that you're bringing up, the less you claim to be historically authentic, that really saves you a lot of headaches of having to explain yourself, of easy critiques that people could give you for not being historically accurate or something like that. But most importantly, as an artist, as a creative, it gives you so much more personal freedom if you just say, I'm inspired by it. It's but there is also, of course, the value in the hardcore reenactment part of it too, right? But
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
but just how important it is to know what you're doing and what you're claiming to do is so important for saving yourself headaches of people who misunderstand what you're trying to do and allowing yourself more freedom.
yeah, I absolutely agree, and it really depends on your mission.
Exactly.
Um, and I have so much respect for those who really dig deep into it, those who both master to be like historical as accurate as you can be. Um, yeah, and there were times, when I got into this medieval scene, where I felt like I wanted Virelai to be more like historical correct in the clothing, and it was just. But Virelai is wonderful. It's like a kindergarten. You can't really control anything, and we were all just. Um, so so that never happened. But then there was actually a very skilled reenactor once, and she said to me, as I was like, "Oh, I just wish we had like at least like our clothing would represent the same timeline, so it's not like a role player, a Viking." And she was really good. She said like, it's about 3% who would notice. 3% who come at this market would notice that you're like aligned in a time period. Yeah. But I still really, I know I mentioned them a lot, but you should really check this people out,
I
because
will. No,
they,
you, especially with your recommendation, I'm going to give them a listen right when we're done here.
yeah, but I'm just like, because they just sort of did the work. It's like we have this, we work in this time area, this time frame, our clothing, our instruments, our repertoire, everything is as accurate as it can be, and they play amazing as well. So they really done, yeah. And I was like, I want to be like that as well, because that's really cool. So the other approach, as you say, is more. It gives a lot of freedom, and you can save yourself headaches. You also lose some jobs if they have like a place where it's like, but we have to be accurate here.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, because there already are, I'm thinking of Trio Medieval. I might be butchering that pronunciation, but that Norwegian trio, they like that's an example of an ensemble that goes very hard into the classically trained representation of the medieval period. I mean, their CD that's called Folk Songs that has Jendina's Bodenlot on it is one of my favorite albums of all time. But that historical authenticity, at least to me, and I'll say this to you, that doesn't hold up to the fun of a Virelai album, at least to me. I mean, like Virelai is so much fun. That is also, but the trio Medival, they're also doing their own thing that's very important. That gives me a lot of value listening to it, and really just what you said. I think that we benefit from having all kinds of these different perspectives on it. Yeah.
And Virelai has really had like the mission was to be a band that would make people happy.
And that succeeded.
Yeah. So that was sort of like the main frame was bring people together and make them happy. So, and that was actually, I don't know if anyone would notice when they, so I know some would, but in the beginning it was, we were debating a lot because I came from this ballad tradition, or what would you say? I have like, I had sort of an approach, like a traditional approach, and like the founder of the band, Søren, he was like, we're always like changing the stories if they were too ghastly or too scary. And we had a lot of discussions in the beginning because I was like, can't do that. Well, it's really, why? And hey, kids can handle this, and they see stuff that's much worse in computer games. And he was like, yeah, but that's exactly why we're not going to present them to more of that. Let's just let people leave with a happy face. And I think I was frustrated for some years because I was like, you can't just like cut off, but it made so much sense. And throughout the years, I experienced how wonderful it is going to work just for the purpose of making people really happy. It's just been, you know, what an amazing thing to be able to do. And now I have quit Virelai after 16 wonderful years, and it felt like, oh, this is the time to say thank you so much for a lovely journey, and I've really learned so much, and I've enjoyed it so much. Now I'm going to do some other things with the ballads, and it's also really wonderful to return to, like, I can do whatever ballad theme I want to without this, but I will say it really made a difference, and it made sense to go like Happy Life.
Yeah, no, it's great. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to what you're doing next, and I guess for that I'll have just one more question for you. Do you have a favorite ballad?
Oh my god, I have so many. Oh, I have many favorite ballads. I think I have one in particular I really love. It's like, but it's like, again, do I have to pick one? It's really difficult. Everything depends on the weather and how the coffee was.
Then how about just what's your favorite right now, without it needing to be set in stone?
Yeah, I think there's a special ballad that, and I learned it when I was 17, and it's been reoccurring, like, and I really, really love it, the images of it. It's like the maiden in wolf, ham, not ham, like ham. Oh, that's funny. Oh, that would be nice in Danish. Oh my god!
Is this Jomfruen I Ulveham? Is this the ballad?
Exactly.
Didn't Goldfish sing that at Eurovision?
Oh yeah, perhaps. I don't have a TV.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. but I just really love that ballad, and it's been sort of, yeah. I always love singing it. I think it's a really lovely story.
Is there anything in particular about it that resonates with you, or is it just the fact that you've had it for so long and
it shifts all the time, you know, also because depending on whatever approach and version, I just really like the sort of like folklore animistic thing, you know, that you can have like such a pure heart. Who doesn't want to have such a pure heart, that even if you you're transformed into a pair of scissors or a sword or a, a werewolf, that you will always be like the best kind of scissors or a sword or a werewolf. I just think it's really sweet and it's really beautiful to sort of the connecting with these items or animals but all the ballads with this transformational sort of topic. I really love it. Whether it's like you're turning into a tree or you're turning into a bird or you're turning into a bird. I think it's really beautiful. It's connective. Yeah. And I just think the good mood, I think it's because that what resonated with this little girl singing in the pigeon coop. It's like, life can really give you like sort of stuff and you're not really prepared for anything and you just have to go along and see whatever happens. But I just think from an early age, I was like determined to like, I will not, calm down my happiness. I will not calm down my ADHD happiness, whatever it is, like this pure sense of happiness and vitality. And I think that's why this ballad speaks to me, because regardless of what this poor young maiden is put into, she'll make the best of it. Just be,
That's awesome.
Yes, good as you can. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm very glad that I asked that. I'm sorry that I sprang that on you without warning.
No.
I know it's very high pressure. What's my favorite one? Why is he doing this? But Mia, I want to say I did not plan on having you on Zoom for almost 2 hours. So you've been a real trooper here. You've been a real trooper here. Yeah,
that's like crazy. Yeah. I really enjoyed it as well. It was wonderful. And I want to know more about, the stuff that you're engaged in. It's so interesting. Would love to, hear everything about it.
Of course. Well, and you can always, don't be a stranger. We can always email each other, message on Facebook or anything. And then we have a lot to talk about for when I do get the particulars down of whenever I go to Denmark. Because I would love, love to interact in some way with that. But yeah, so Mia, but before I let you go here, do you just want to talk a little bit about what you're up to now? The most recent thing I saw from you was, I think, when you did the Roskilde sessions with that wonderful group of musicians. Your version of Runt på Gulva was just one of my favorite versions of. I showed my students that recording when we did our class on European folk music. I was like, and I showed them that because it's just so much fun. You have such a natural charisma and energy as a singer, and seeing you perform with all of those incredible musicians all in one room. That was crazy.
I was really after rock as well. I was like, why did they invite me over there? What are they thinking? Yeah, but actually, this version that I leaned upon, and this is from the collaboration with the Morten Alfred Højrup, who's a wonderful folk guitarist in Denmark, and who is actually the only person still responsible for, he makes like a podcast with Danish folk music radio.
Awesome.
So it's really, thank you, because as I mentioned, it's not to be found anywhere else, but it's from an album we made. That sort of that version of it. But it's quite a while ago. Since,
but there hasn't really been a new Virelai album either, so I don't really. Yeah, but the Guldganger stuff.
Yeah, so I have like now it's like I'm trying to get back on track. Like, okay, what to do now? Like the band that made my primary income is I quit that. Was that okay? So So I have I have a duo with a very great singer-songwriter, a Danish woman called Sara Krabov. We do like ballad extracts. So we take the ballads and we suck out an intention and we make like it's very inspired from like the 70s American folk tradition as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we have this one, and then there's Guldganger with the Christian Mohr, who he's like, isn't he the most? He's like crazy on Stryglyr. I'm just like, I'm getting to play with that guy. It's amazing. Have you heard him play the Stryglyr?
Yes. Yeah. It's insane.
It's like, I'm just like, oh, so that was how it was supposed to sound. Apparently, he's just crazy, talented in this. Yeah, it's him and my good old friend Morten Musicus also, that I've made music with for many years, and they're so sweet because they've been like, we're focusing on the ballads now. You just sing your ballads, whatever ballads you want to sing, and we'll back you up, and that's just wonderful to have this hammered dulcimer and Stryglyr. So we're working on this and have already built up a repertoire and doing gigs. Then I've had more and more like jobs where it's like, giving a speech or lecture on traditional Danish ballads and ballad singing, and what are the special quirks and funny things about ballad singing and the history of the ballads. So who collected and how did this happen? And then that's sort of mixed in with like workshop, people learning ballads and doing chain dancing. So sort of a workshop more approach there, yeah. And then there's just like little loose projects in various folk music areas. So it's a bit like the rock you stitch together from many small pieces of fabric, as I think many musicians like. Yeah, they look like that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Mia, it has been a pleasure to finally have you here on the Nordic Sound. The brief connectivity issues aside, it's been a really wonderful conversation. So happy I've learned so much from you in this very relatively short conversation. And I really look forward to keeping up with what you're doing and all that, because the ballads also have a very close place to my heart, because I love folk stories. Like, I started off, my whole interest in all of this started with folk tales, especially trolls. I love trolls and all of this. And it's just, when I was first introduced to Virelai through my friend Matthias Nordvig, and then of course Jacob, like all of this. I've just fallen absolutely in love with that whole project and learning about the whole Danish side of things, which, because I'm a Norwegianist, normally the Danish side gets sort of like pushed off to the side. But no, it's just, anyway, all of this is just to say that I really appreciate you coming onto the Nordic Sound to talk about the Danish side of things and your work as a vocalist and a ballad singer, because this is a part of the story that is just so important. And I really appreciate everything you do for ballads and for the reenactment scene.
It's really nice of you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you. Hey, what's your favorite ballad?
Dramkvæða? Does that count?
Okay.
I don't know. I know that's an easy answer. I love because, there's a reason, and it's because I'm also a teacher, right? And there's this misconception that things were pagan and then they were Christian, and there was no in between. Dramkvæða is full of pagans. Heimdall, the god Heimdall, is in it, but he's also going to church, and it's just this. It's like this fever dream of just like how many drugs were required to write this ballad, right? And I love Harald Foss's version. Harald Foss he was the very first person to ever introduce me to ballads. But there's so many great versions of it too. But I listen to it every Christmas just because there's so much in it that's fun to listen to. Yeah, sorry, you got me dorking out about Dramkvæða, but no, that's definitely my favorite.
Yeah, it's so good to hear what your favorite is.
Yeah, awesome. But yeah, so Mia, just hang out for a second after I stop the recording. But other than that, thank you so much for coming on the Nordic Sound, and don't be a stranger, all right?
Thank you so much for the
invitation. Of course.